Okay, so let's say you're crazy like me. Let's say you want to enter the world of being a polyglot. Now, you know already from my earlier videos that using a program like Anki can really help you manage knowing multiple languages at once. But what's the best way to set up Anki for learning multiple languages? Alright guys, I'm going to give you what I've learned from using Anki and from doing multiple languages in Anki for more than a decade. Now, I'm going to warn you, this is all trial and error stuff, right? Sometimes I might contradict like the Anki manual, which is not all that clear about all this stuff. Sometimes I might contradict what they say on the forums. I know there are a lot of people who will disagree with me. This is just kind of what works for me. And also, just so you know, like the production value of this video won't be so high. There's no AI being used. This is just me sort of slapping this together and trying to make it as engaging as possible. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get down to the basics. All right, at first you really want to make sure that you're using multiple cards for each note. This is in part to help organize things in your decks. But it is also because Anki will show you different cards from the same note in consecutive days. And this is really helpful if you're trying to learn a new word or a new phrase or a new sentence or whatever. Once again, I've got to tell you, this is the voice of experience. So back in the old days, back in like 2014 or 13 or whenever it was that I started seriously using Anki, what I did is I had one thing on one side and one thing on the other side. I had, I'm trying to see if I have a card. Yeah, so here we go. This is my my framework sticker, right? So pretend that this is like a index card, right? I would write like one thing on one side and then I'd write the other thing on the other side, right? And that's how I thought of Anki in the beginning. So I had a whole bunch of different notes, all of which had exactly one card, and it would just be front and back. All right, I didn't even do it. You can do it automatically so that it will flip for you. You don't even have to know how to program. I didn't even do that, right? Now, I'm going to tell you that like I made different cards for, or different notes for the different things I was doing, like for writing stuff, for listening practice, and you know, you name it, I had it. Now back in those days, it would take me more time to set up my new cards than to do anything else. I mean, it took me probably five times as much time to set up new cards in Anki than it does now. And the funny thing is that I wasn't really getting the repetition that I needed for the same word. You want to hit it from different angles, and we'll explain about that in a second. Look, the thing you have to keep in mind when you're learning a language is that any good language learning program or textbook or company or whatever it is going to have you learn how to speak, how to listen, how to read, and how to write. Doesn't matter what the language is, doesn't matter how hard it is, doesn't even matter how old it is. You need to be able to do all four things or it's not going to stick. Now, you want to make sure that your Anki deck has you practicing all four of those things, which is why I set it up that way. But the cool thing about Anki is that you don't have to have like a million of these different notes. If you organize it, it's not only easier, but Anki will help you because of this concept called siblings. It makes it so that the stuff will come at you more like it should. Now, let me explain about this. All right, so there's this thing called notes which contain information. So for example, the French word bonjour and the English translation hello. Now, traditionally, you would create a little flashcard with the word bonjour on one side and hello on the other, though there are drawbacks, such as the fact that you're limited to whatever you can write on the card, you can't insert audio, you can't put in a picture, and so on. Now, Anki uses fields to allow each note to contain as much information as you want, and you can display that information in different ways through cards that you program yourself. So if you're like me and you come up with a bunch of different card types per note, each individual card for each note winds up being called a sibling. It is a brother or a sister of the other cards, which is weird, whatever. Now, Anki will automatically bury the siblings when they come up so you don't study like the same word or phrase or whatever multiple times today. And it will also make sure that you will look at the sibling of a new card that you had today when you study tomorrow. And you can change those settings if you want. All right, so when those cards come up again, when the siblings come up again, and by the way, I hate this terminology because I get confused as well. When these sibling cards come up again, they won't necessarily come up again on consecutive days. So the way that it's set up is so that if I'm learning, the new word framework, right? That's the word I'm going to learn, right? Framework will come up on day 1, let's say, and it asks me, what's the definition of this? And then on day 2, it'll be like the card that's backwards, right? On day 3, it'll be the one that has me write it down, That's the way that it'll start when it's first teaching you these cards, when you're encountering it for the first time. But when it gets into your review mix, you don't have to worry about it following that pattern. It'll start coming at you at random. That's part of the cool thing of the algorithm, right? This is very, very helpful to your learning because when you start to learn something, it's very helpful to have it from all sorts of different angles. But once it's been in your mind for a while and you've seen it like over and over and over again because you're actually paying attention when you're doing Anki and stuff like that, once it's deeper in your mind, you don't need to have it come up like 7 days in a row or however you have it set up, right? So the other thing that you should know about this is that if you need to learn that framework word again, just make sure I don't have this upside down. You can't see it anyway. If you need to learn framework again for one card, you won't need to relearn it for all of the sibling cards as well. In other words, the review time is specific to just the individual card, not all of the sibling cards that are attached to it. Anyway, yeah, I know that this sounds weird. It sounds like I'm speaking a foreign language. I didn't come up with these words. It's confusing, but when you kind of wrap your head around it, it's actually really helpful and it works really well. Now, the other thing you can do here is organize all of your languages into their own subdecks, just like I've done here. So to set it up like this, you can go down to Create Deck, and then you write the name of your main deck followed by 2 colons and the name of your new deck. Then you go to Browse and you select the cards that you want to stick in this new deck. Now, as you can see here, I don't have any Vietnamese cards, so this is all Taiwanese Hokkien, so sue me, whatever. So you right-click the cards and you go down to Cards and then Change Deck. And now you can move those cards into the subdeck that you want. Okay, so right now you're probably wondering, why even bother with this? Why do you want to stick your cards into subdecks? Why bother with the organization? Now there's 2 real reasons why you want to do this, right? Now the first reason you want to put this into subdecks is because it can help you if you need to cram for a certain card, right? So let's say that, heaven forbid, let's say that for some reason I have to go to South Korea tomorrow and I'm like, oh crap, I can't remember how to say anything, right? Well, then I can go into Anki and I can be like, let me go cram in as much as I possibly can. Now, this is a really, really bad way to learn stuff. Trust me, I've tried it. It ends up overwhelming you and confusing you, right? But if you have to do it, you can do it really easily with those subdecks. You already got it set up ahead of time, right? But the second reason why you want to do this is because you really want to have a good mix of cards from all the languages that you're learning. So no matter how hard you try to plan this, you will always wind up with more cards from 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever of your languages than from the others. There's no way that you can schedule your learning so perfectly that it will be perfectly balanced. It's just not going to happen. But if you want to do the multilingual thing and you want to do it right, you need to have some balance. You need to have around an equal amount of cards from the different decks as much as possible come out. And especially for new cards, if I'm learning, Vietnamese and I already have 10 other languages because I'm crazy, right? I want to make sure I'm still getting enough new Vietnamese cards so that I'm actually learning it, right? If it's overwhelmed because I have 50,000 Chinese cards in my system because I'm a crazy man, I'm never going to get to the Vietnamese cards and then it doesn't work right. It doesn't kickstart the learning process. Anyway, let me show you here how to get that set up. So once again, you see that gear on the right side? It's on the side of all your decks and subdecks, right? Well, if you go into options, you can change a ton of stuff. You see, Anki is set up so that you can have the same options for multiple decks or subdecks or whatever. Now, by the way, if you've been paying attention to this, you'll notice that this really is a theme in Anki. So if you have, you don't even have to know how to do SQL or anything. If you just have a basic understanding of what computer databases are and sort of how they work, this will make some sense to you. And if you have no understanding of how this works, sort of like me, using this will teach you how databases work. Anki is basically database management software. That's what it is. And unlike most database management software, we have to write in like a query to get something out or whatever. With Anki, it's set up literally to like display this stuff at you, to display part of the database at you that has been organized into these notes that are then sub-organized into cards and stuff like that. That's just the way that this works. Every single part of Anki is like big organization going down to smaller little organizations and on and on and on, right? It's like the org chart from hell. That's really what it is. Anyway, it's also designed to be as open as possible to human modification. In other words, like you can do anything that you want in this. In fact, we don't have a whole bunch of really creative people on Anki. I mean, we have people like turning it into like Pokemon or whatever. You can play a game with it that has you learn stuff. But if you think about it, since it's really wide open, you could do anything that you wanted to with this. You can learn anything and have it repeat at certain intervals, however you like. Anyway, the thing is, when you do these subdecks, you do want the subdecks to more or less have the same settings. At least that's the way that I have it set up. Now, it's easier if they have the same settings because you can then change all of the settings at once instead of having to go into every individual subdeck. So I've got my main deck set up like this. For insertion order, I have sequential selected, which means the oldest cards theoretically will come first. For display order, I have new cards gathered by deck, sorted randomly, and everything mixed in with the reviews. Now, you don't have to do it that way, right? You can change it around as you like, right? In fact, I've done a lot of changing things around by myself. That's kind of how I got to this system as it currently is today. I mean, it's not been like a couple days and this works, this doesn't work. It's been years and years of trying to work with this and get it set up, and that's kind of why I'm doing it this way. And now I'll show you what my subdeck options look like. So it's kind of similar, though I prefer to have the insertion order here set to random. And I know that there's this warning about the version 3 scheduler, but I still prefer to do it this way. So like I said, this comes from trial and error. So when I set this to oldest, the way that I think you're supposed to, this would simply show me the oldest new node, i.e. the oldest node that hadn't been studied yet, even with the gathering order set to random. And I could tell. In fact, I could tell, I can't remember which language it was, but I could tell because there were certain mistakes that I'd made, like when I first created these cards, right? Now, I want to see all this stuff in random. So I decided to change it to this way that is not recommended in the program, and people on the forums and stuff will yell at me for doing, but it works, right? Now, I'm sure that those Anki purists will disagree. I'm sure that there's some sort of argument about why it shouldn't work this way. I have spent time trying to figure this out and understand it. I'm telling you, this is the way that it works. It works this way for me, and you might want to try it this way because it might work better for you. Now, the other thing you'll notice is that I've got each subdeck set to add in only 10 new cards a day. Now, if you look back at the overall deck, it's set up for 9,999 new cards per day. We use that number because it's the max for some reason. And both of these subdecks and the decks are set up for 9,999 reviews per day. So I actually messed around with this a little bit before creating this video. I tried to reduce the number of reviews that each subdeck had to 100, right? This is based off of a comment that I responded to on an earlier video where I think I gave that as advice. I better go back and change that comment because actually it didn't work. Now, it should have worked in theory. This is another Anki thing where it's like, oh, well, this is the way the program's set up. It's designed to work this way, but it doesn't, right? So when I did my study today, none of my subdecks had more than 60 reviews or so. And so in theory, setting the reviews per subdeck to 100 should have worked. But in practice, what happened is I went through all of the reviews, but then had a bunch of new cards for each language, each subdeck that weren't displayed. And so I had to go back in and change it back to the settings that I had before, and then it worked. So you do want to have those like max number of reviews or whatever it's called up to 9,999. Now, I don't know why it works this way. I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know if I did something wrong. I'm sure people will tell me I did. I don't have the patience for that. I don't have a whole bunch of time to get into this discussion. I don't have time for the doublespeak explanations. Again, I just want it to work. That's why I recommend doing it the way that I have it set up. Anyway, like I said, this is the setup that works for me. Anyway, I've also got the subdeck set to take everything in random order. Now, there's other stuff that you can mess around with here, like the FSRS settings and all of that, though, as you can see, I haven't even touched any of this stuff. These are all just the default settings. All right, so there are people around who spend much more time fiddling around with those FSRS settings and the algorithm than actually, using Anki to study whatever they wanted to study. And honestly, like, more power to them. There are times where I regret, not being more active on forums and like getting to know this guy who like changed the algorithm around or whatever. But I'm telling you, I don't have the patience for it. Like, I thank you guys for the hard work that you do. It's because of you guys that it works for me, but honestly, I'm just putting my trust into what these algorithms do because I don't have the time or patience to sit around and wade through the math and learn all the theory behind it. But again, I do want to tell you that there is a method to my madness, especially to the reason why I really want everything mixed up instead of, sequestered from one language to the next and so on. So there are a lot of people who want to study and review languages sequentially. I guess the idea is that you don't want your Chinese words to get mixed up with your Korean words. However, in my experience, what you really want is a lot of cross-pollination instead of having everything separated. It helps a lot when you come across something suddenly or at random. So now the way to understand this, it's taken me years to really get this, is that when you're learning a language and you're using Anki, you're not really trying to memorize stuff like you think you are, right? You know how it is. So when I was in Chinese 101, this is, how many years ago is this? I don't know, 20 something years ago or something like that. I remember like working really, really hard to try to memorize how to write characters because we would have tests and you have to write down the character that the teacher tells you to write down, right? I remember studying that for the final. I remember sitting down and, writing over and over and over again to make sure that I remember this, make sure I remember the stroke order, make sure I remember what it looks like so, I can get it right. But there's a difference between like cramming for the test and actually learning the language, right? So when we're using Anki to learn these words and phrases and sentences and the grammar stuff and all this other stuff I've told you about, like, you're doing this not necessarily to memorize things. You're doing this so that it starts to feel natural to you, right? So you want to get past this idea of I'm going to memorize the language and I'm going to be like the robot that regurgitates, Korean or Japanese or something. You want it instead to feel like a language that you've heard a lot and you've heard things in different contexts and you understand, oh, this is what happens if it's said this way, this is what happens if it's said that way, and so on and so forth, right? In other words, it's really immersion that you're after, not just memorizing. Now, if you have kids, you know this, right? The way the kids learn language from the time that they're young is they don't go around memorizing stuff, right? They say what kind of feels right, and they'll make mistakes because maybe there's something they didn't hear before, maybe they forgot what the rule is for this or that. But the more that they hear a language, the more that they read a language, the more that they're immersed in that environment, the more fluent they're going to be at the language. Now, there are some things that they still might get wrong, right, from time to time. I mean, I get things wrong when I speak English all the time, let alone write it. People tell me that, right? But it's that immersion that helps you become fluent in a language. It's much more than memorizing. Now, to be really blunt with you, that's also the difference between like theoretical linguistics and actually studying a language. So for example, right, you don't necessarily want to know how the ba particle works in Chinese. If you've studied Chinese, you know what I'm talking about. 我把这个东西给你, right, this ba. Right? I don't even know how to explain it in English. I don't know what the linguistic term is for, but I definitely know how ba works, right? And I also know what some of the classical equivalents are because they use different characters back in the olden days. That doesn't really matter. What matters is that you have a feeling for how it works, right? Because if you're reading a book, if you're reading, if you're reading Jia by Ba Jin, right, one of the novels that I love, and if he uses this ba, participle in the book, to say, somebody took this thing, gave it to someone else, or did something with it or whatever, you don't want to freeze and be like, I don't know what's going on here, right? Let me go grab the grammar book, right? At some point in time, you want to be able to read it and to know what it is that he's saying and have it conjure up a certain image in your mind, right? Same thing with reading Dream of the Red Chamber, right? There's all sorts of stuff that I come across where I'm like, I don't know what this means, but the way to address that is to slow down, to study it, to learn what the grammatical particle is, and then you use Anki and you start sticking this stuff in Anki and you say, well, I'm going to come up to this again. And when I come up to it again, it's going to, hit in my head one time, and the next time I'll have somebody reading it out loud to me. I'll have to read it out loud myself. That's how you learn how it works, right? You want that feeling for how it works. And the way that you get that feeling is by having a bunch of sentences and words and other things come at you when you're least expecting it, right? If you know what's coming, you're not going to get the feeling. You need that deeper feeling beyond just memorization. You need the deep feeling inside. And this is why I also highly recommend using native speaker audio. Seriously, the best homework you can do to learn a language is to sit down and watch television. I'm serious. Now, you want to watch shows with native audio spoken at native speeds. I recommend going straight for the native stuff, not going for stuff that's designed for foreigners learning the language. You want to hit the speed at native speed. And the purpose of taking these sentences and breaking them up into Anki cards, which you should do if you have time, is to get a better feel for the language, like I just said. Remember, it's not to memorize, it's to immerse yourself in the foreign language. All right, so the crazy thing about all this and all my rambling is that it actually works. Like, you actually can learn more than one language. You can learn more than 12 if you like. You could learn more than 20 if you like, if you have the time, right? In fact, with Anki, you can stick in all sorts of stuff. You can stick in geography quizzes, right? This is one of those decks you can download that people love to use. You can stick in chess puzzles, right? You can stick in like famous quotations if you want. You can stick in movie quotations or whatever it is. You can put in memes if you want to learn what the memes mean or something like that, right? And it works, like it really works. If you seriously go through this and you're treating it the way you should, it works and it starts sticking stuff into your long-term memory. It's like a miracle. It really is, right? So, for example, right, I had this famous quotation from Hannah Arendt, the famous journalist, called "The Banality of Evil," which they used to describe, Germany during World War II, the Nuremberg trials and stuff like that. Well, I had gone through a book, one of the big books of quotations. I think it was like the Oxford Book of Quotations or something, and I typed all sorts of cool stuff in, and that phrase popped up one point in time. Now, I've taken a lot of this stuff out. I've decided that for English quotes in English, I want to kind of redo that subdeck and figure stuff out, and then I kind of ran out of time to redo it. But because the banality of evil had popped up numerous times, and I saw it numerous times and heard it, and so on and so forth, it sticks up in your head, and I remember it. I know that I saw that because I saw it over and over and over again. See, that's what I'm talking about. Like, this stuff works. Now, that's a pretty simple phrase, right? But, you'll see it work for you in German or French or Japanese or, Hindi or classical Greek or whatever it is that you're trying to learn. So anyway, that's my point. This stuff really does work. Give it a try and experiment with it yourself. And I think you'll discover that becoming a polylingual or multilingual individual is not like some fancy thing that people can't do. I'm just an ordinary guy, man. If I can do this, you can do it.